The last time Penn State came into Huntington Bank Stadium, they sported the same number 4 ranking that they sport this week. It was back in 2019 when one of the best Golden Gopher teams in recent memory knocked off the Nittany Lions on that particular Saturday afternoon. Can Minnesota play spoiler this time of the college football playoff variety in Minneapolis on Saturday?
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
The big question for the blue and white of Penn State following that early November loss to the Ohio State Buckeyes was, how will this team be able to respond after that loss yet again to the Ohio State Buckeyes? They certainly responded well, and they've responded well on the offensive side of the football. Now, there is something that I do have to say before I proceed any longer and talk about the success of Penn State over these last 2 games. They haven't exactly played the toughest competition in the world, right? The Washington Huskies in the whiteout, and then you have Purdue on the road. Purdue is one of the worst teams in the Power 4, certainly right now. So there needs to be some context when talking about these last 2 games, but there's something to be said about gaining confidence, not letting that Ohio State game drag you down, but bouncing back right away and playing efficient football. When you talk about the offensive performances for Penn State the last 2 weeks, one thing that's really stood out to me is the play of Drew Aller and this throw game for the Nittany Lions, and that's exactly where I want to start this preview. Penn State, 12.5-point favorites going on the road to a Minnesota team that is coming off of a bye week. Temps are going to be in the mid-30s in the Twin Cities for this particular matchup. So, talking about this passing offense for Penn State lately. Drew Aller, 20 of 28, 228 yards and a touchdown in that aforementioned whiteout game against Washington. And then last week at Purdue, only 2 incompletions, 17 of 19, 247 yards and 3 touchdowns. Once again, we want to mention, not the greatest competition, but when we talked about that Ohio State game, and what was something that was lacking for Penn State, their ability to push the ball down the field, their ability to have a good enough passing game and a good enough threat in the passing game to be able to compete against a team like Ohio State. So for them to be able to play this type of efficient football, look, Penn, you are who you are. I think at this point in the season, I think Penn State knows they're not going to beat a ton of teams over the top, but they're going to beat you with smart scheme. They're going to beat you with smart play calling. They're going to beat you by protecting Drew Aller, and Drew Aller also protecting the football. This is such an intriguing matchup in this game because Minnesota has a really good secondary. I preface this with the passing game because now I think we're going to find out exactly where it is against a Minnesota Golden Gopher defense that is advantageous and that can also be aggressive. The Gophers 6th in the Big Ten against the pass this season, but the stat that I really want to make known is the number 16. Minnesota has generated 16 turnovers via the interception this season, and that leads the Big Ten Conference right now. But there's something also that needs to be said about Minnesota. They've been good against the pass all year. But like I said, they're coming off of a bye. But the game before that was that loss to Rutgers where Ethan Kaliakmanis, certainly not one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten, threw for not 1, not 2, but 240 yards against this Minnesota defense. Was that a fluke, or was that maybe something that is trending that way or happening right now for Minnesota? We are certainly going to find that out. So how can Minnesota use that secondary against a wide receiver core that maybe isn't the best, doesn't have a ton of big-time playmakers on it? How can Minnesota really take advantage of that? How can they take advantage of that matchup? Minnesota needs to try to quicken the amount of time that Drew Aller has back there. That's the thing. When I watch these Washington tape and I watch the Purdue tape, Drew Aller, he's got time to go through all of his progression and make the correct reads to move the football down the field. Minnesota needs to quicken that clock. Because in theory, here's a couple of things that can and might happen if the clock is indeed quickened. You have defensive backs that can match up, once again, in theory, against Penn State's wide receivers. And if John Joyner and some of these defensive linemen can get into the face of Drew Aller, that now quickens the decision-making for Drew, and maybe some of these guys in the secondary can stay on these receivers long enough to be able to make a big play. I feel like Minnesota needs to be advantageous. They need to continue to be aggressive to win the turnover battle. But it is tough against a team like against a quarterback, like Drew Aller. He's thrown 5 interceptions in total this season. 3 of them came in one game against the USC Trojans. Just 2 interceptions in every other game this season. So, and then when you take a look at getting pressure on Drew, I think that's a whole nother thing. Penn State has done a really good job protecting him this season. Aller's been sacked 3 times in the last 4 games, and he has not been sacked in the last 2 games since that Ohio State game. I think that he is just so disciplined as the leader of this offense, and he's just been a really good decision maker. He was a really good decision maker last year, and he's been a really good decision maker certainly this year within this Penn State offense as well. Can Minnesota create some havoc? They're going to need to be able to have a chance to upset the Penn State Nittany Lions in this particular game. Now, we talked about the receivers and we talked about the matchups with some of these defensive backs, but when we talk about the pass game, and it really actually goes beyond the pass game for Penn State, you got to talk about Tyler Warren and Minnesota. You need to be aware of Mr. Warren. You need to be aware of 44 in blue and white. I know I've said it before. I know it sounds like a broken record, but this guy is a freaking unicorn out there. They will line him up literally, quite literally, anywhere on the football field. You want to be aware of him because he is such a large part to what Andy Kotelnicki and Penn State does offensively. Tyler Warren has accounted for 21.2% of Penn State's total yardage this season. He can hurt you in the run game. He can hurt you in the throw game from out wide, from the slot at the typical tight end position. We talked about that run game lining up at the quarterback position. Like, if I'm Penn State and I need short yardage, I need to convert a 3rd and 2. I need to be able to convert a 4th and 1. I'm giving 44 in blue and white the ball. I know they got Katron Allen. I know they got Nick Singleton, and I know, and you can incorporate the run game certainly in other ways, and I think they're going to in this game against Minnesota. But man, Tyler Warren, he's got to be the guy. He's got to be the guy for Penn State, and he's got to be the guy that Minnesota needs to match up on. Cody Lindenberg, the linebacker, he's an athletic linebacker over there for Minnesota. I think he's going to be asked to step up to be able to defend Tyler Warren. I think this is going to be a more methodical type of game for Penn State compared to maybe what we've seen certainly the last few weeks. I think Penn State is going to get that run game going to try to slow down this rush, to try to slow down that pressure that we talked about for Minnesota. I think this is a methodical type of game plan for James Franklin and Andy Kotelnicki. I think they're going to look to wear down Minnesota very similarly to how they wore down the Wisconsin Badgers in the second half of that road game. Remember, Wisconsin was leading in that game. It wouldn't surprise me to see a very similar type of first half for Minnesota in this game against the Penn State Nittany Lions. All right, let's finish things off by talking about Minnesota. I think there's been, for most of the year, there's been something very consistent. It hasn't really been Darius Taylor. He's risen up. He's had a couple of 100-yard rushing games, but he's also dipped down like he did against Rutgers. I think you need to let Brosmer play to the max. I think you need to put the ball into the hands of 16 in maroon and gold, and you gotta try to let him spin it. And when you look at some things and when you look at some of the matchups as it pertains to Minnesota and their throw game, you need to get rid of the football quickly. You need to try to find a way to scheme up some advantages when it comes to this defensive line, when it comes to this pass rush for Penn State. Get rid of the football quickly, but don't get rid of the football laterally, right? Minnesota, and it's not just this year, but Minnesota's done a really good job at getting just those slant patterns over the middle, connecting on a 7 to 8 yard pass play, and letting somebody like an Elijah Spencer do his thing. Let Daniel Jackson certainly do his thing in a catch and run type of situation, and then let that maybe open up some run lanes for Darius Taylor in this run game for the Minnesota Golden Gophers, because there's a lot of advantages in terms of the front 7 for Penn State. You need to try to take advantage of maybe those matchups on the back end for Minnesota to be able to come on top in this game. But I think if the Gophers are going to pull this upset, Max Brosmer, he's had a lot of really good games. He needs to have his best game of 2024. All right, folks, it is prediction time. I picked this one to be a close, methodical type of Penn State win before the season started. And I thought this game, late in the year, going on the road, Gophers coming off of a bye, might be a little bit tricky, and it could be. But my prediction is a Penn State victory, 24-16 over the Minnesota Golden Gophers. I think that you're going to have long drives similar to like you had against Wisconsin. They're going to run the football consistently. They're going to get it to Tyler Warren on play action, and they're just going to do what they need to do against this Minnesota team. I've got Minnesota scoring 16. I could see the Gophers moving the football a little bit in this game. I think it's going to be tough for Minnesota to finish drives in the end zone against this Penn State defense. Those are my thoughts on this game. What are your thoughts on this game? Leave all of your score predictions in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.